Welcome to Expert Profiles Atlanta, where Atlanta's influencers and innovators share strategies for overcoming obstacles and achieving success in business and life. Here's your host, best-selling author and Atlanta influencer, Neil Howe.
Hello and welcome to the show. This is your host, Neil Howe, and today my guest is Judith Delus Montgomery, and she helps husbands, fathers, and immigrants navigate the treacherous waters of family and immigration legal waters without drowning. Welcome to the show, Judith.
Thank you for having me, Neil. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's hear a little bit about yourself and the law offices of Judith Delus, and who are your clients and how do you help them?
All right. Well, I have been practicing family law and immigration in the metro Atlanta area for over 6 years. We primarily assist, as you stated, fathers and husbands in dealing with custody, visitation, divorce, all aspects of family law, whether it be modification of child support, modification of alimonies. Those are the people that we assist mostly, but we don't shy away. We assist everybody. We assist mothers. We assist wives. We assist everybody, but we do have a particular niche area where we do focus on fathers and husbands.
Well, fathers and husbands, and this might be a misconception, but they definitely need that help. Oftentimes it's the mother that is unhappy and goes to court to file divorce, and that leaves the father and the husband in that precarious situation, and they need help. So talk to me about that, and what kind of situations arise and what kind of problems does that put them in?
Well, I can tell you one of the things that I have seen with my firm is that the marriage has completely broken down at this time, and the parties are no longer getting along. The communication has broken down, but both of them are still residing in the home, and that's where we find that people go wrong. You have to make the decision on and who's going to move out. You both cannot stay in the home because it's such a toxic environment. It's a toxic environment for the parties, and it's a toxic environment for the children. But obviously, the home belongs to, both of you. So you feel compelled to say, I'm not leaving my home. Well, someone has to leave, because what ends up happening, what we see is that a verbal confrontation turns into a physical confrontation. And the next thing you know, police are being called. The wife or the mother is filing a temporary restraining order against, the husband or the father. And at that time, that's kind of the first step towards filing a divorce. But now you have a situation where you have to combat that restraining order, because that shows up on your criminal report. It shows up when you're trying to apply for a job. You have to relinquish the possessions of your firearms, if you have any, to the police department. A temporary protective order in 30 days can become a permanent protective order for 1 year, depending on the circumstances of the case. So now you're walking into a divorce case where you may be seeking, 50% custody of the children, the property, the home, but now you have this restraining order against you where you may appear to be violent. And a lot of times that's not the case. These folks could have been married for 5, 15, 20 years, and there was never an altercation. No police were ever called, no actions of violence. But this incident now kind of puts a cloud over the domestic matter that's before the court. And now the judge is only seeing a snapshot of who you are, but it gives a bad taste in the court's mouth. And so that's what you don't want to happen. So I always advise people to just go ahead and make the decision to find another place to live if it gets that bad. So now you have a TPO, now a divorce has been filed, and now we're fighting. Usually it's custody of the children. That's always kind of the crux of the divorce matter and why it stalls or why it takes so long to resolve. It's usually custody issues.
Right. And that seems a very hard place to be. Is, you want to be with the children, you want to stay in the home, but ultimately if things are getting that bad between the husband and wife, it's better to move out to prevent all these problems.
Correct. That is correct.
So as far as when the best time to do that is, because like you said, it's both of their houses. Nobody really wants to move. What do you suggest that a husband does? Because ultimately it feels like, I imagine, it's relinquishing control of the situation if you do move out.
That's correct. Well, what I have found is we have to think about the children at this time, the minor children. That needs to be the focus of the parties. And so you have to, you know what your family dynamic is. So you know who's the primary caregiver, who is the one shuffling the kids back and forth to school, to soccer practice, to basketball practice, who is the one that spends the most time with the children. And that is the person more than likely that should be able to remain in the home, because the children should remain in the home and they should have continuity and stability, even with all of this change going about between the parties, breaking up in the home, is falling apart. You still want to maintain some type of stability for the children. And so the position is, there are stay-at-home dads. Obviously, it's not as many as stay-at-home moms, but there are stay-at-home dads. And if dad has been the consistent party, they are the ones that, tuck the children in at night, read them a nighttime story, wake them up in the morning, pack their lunch, pick them up from school, then that's who stays in the home with the children. And so we're seeing that more where moms are allowing fathers to have primary custody of the children, and they are the ones who are moving out and finding another place to stay. And they are the ones who are paying child support, depending on what the status, if they have a career that requires them to be gone a majority of the time, where they travel a lot for work. That's the thing that the parents have to make a decision on. What is going to keep the children stable or keep their environment stable.
Right. And of course, gender roles are very much equal nowadays, where, you don't have the wife sitting at home watching the children. Many women are out there, they have their careers, they, are needed at their jobs. And it's very hard to, make that decision to stay in a home when all these different things are going on.
Correct.
So as far as the custody goes, what is the best result for the child?
It depends. I have had cases where, for the most part, there's a primary custodial parent, and then there's another parent that's non-custodial but has liberal visitation. Georgia specifically, they have a standard a schedule if the parties can't come to an agreement. The non-custodial parent would have visitation first, third, and fifth weekends of the month. They would exchange, they would break down summer, who gets them for spring break, winter break, Christmas, Thanksgiving. Those would be exchanged year to year. 1 year, maybe the mom has the kids in the odd year, dad has them in the even years. So that's really kind of the standard schedule. But we do see where parents are doing 50-50 custody arrangements, where the children are with them maybe 14 days out of the month, and they're with dad 15 days out of the month, or vice versa. We're seeing that. But I can tell you that it has to make sense to the courts. The courts are not in the business of having kids being shuffled between homes constantly. They want to see that the children are stable and that they're comfortable in their environment. And so if they don't believe that that would be in the child's best interest, because that's the standard that the courts use, if they don't see that that schedule would be in the child's best interest, they will not agree to it. I've had a lot of judges who say, I don't agree with 50-50 custody. I don't agree with it. And so when you have a judge like that, well, then you have a problem. So it has to make sense for the courts, and they have to believe that it's in the best interest of the children. If not, it's not going to happen. You're going to find yourself, maybe dad can see them every weekend versus first, third, and fifth. Maybe you have a schedule like that, where from Friday evening until Sunday evening, dad has the children every week. And that way they're remaining in their lives every week versus every other week, which definitely makes it difficult to really have that connection and build that bond with the child. And so what the courts want is that both parents have an equal bonding time with the kids, if possible.
So ultimately, that is the best outcome for the children. And I know there's child support and alimony and, all these visitation and, things to be worked out. So talk to me a little bit about the process, because I guess there's two sides of it. There's either, the husband has taken the decision to file for divorce, or the wife has taken the decision to file for divorce, and the husband has to reply to that. So talk to me about that whole process. Okay.
So one party makes a decision to file a divorce. They have to file a complaint with the courts. And then at that point in time, they also have to have that other party properly served. That means either the sheriff's office serves the party, or a private process server serves the party. So most law firms use their own private process server. But you also can use the sheriff, obviously, if you're representing yourself. And so at that point in time, the other party has 30 days to file what's called an answer. Now, in civil proceedings, because that's what the domestic matter would be, it would be a civil proceeding. Usually within 30 days, if you don't file an answer, after 15 more days, a default action can be filed. Domestic matters are different, because there's property involved, there's children involved. So even if you don't file your answer within the 30 days, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to receive a default judgment. So once they filed a complaint, you filed an answer, maybe you guys have gone out and sought attorneys to represent you, then the next step is, can we come to some type of agreement? What kind of divorce proceeding is this going to be? Is this going to be a contested divorce or an uncontested divorce? There are two types. An uncontested divorce means that both parties agree that it's time to get a divorce. They have already divided their property, the marital assets. They have made a decision on parenting. They have made a decision on child support. That means all matters have been resolved and agreed upon by both parties. And when that happens, then the attorney will simply prepare the petition, prepare the settlement agreement, prepare the post-judgment motions, and file the entire packet with the courts. Now, that's best case scenario, but that's not what we see. So what we usually see is an adversarial proceeding. And so at that point in time, folks just cannot agree on anything, right? And so what we do is we file what's called a temporary motion. And this would temporarily address child support, custody, visitation. It would, and if alimony needs to be assessed as well, or included. So at that point in time, we would get that placed on the calendar. And at that time, the attorneys would see if they could work that out. If not, then obviously we would have to schedule it for a hearing, and the courts would make a decision on all those aspects. And once you have the temporary in place, then that can give you some more time, you and the other party some more time to determine, how do we want to conclude this matter? Is there anything that we can agree on? If not, then we could schedule a mediation where an unbiased third party would sit down with the parties and see if we can iron out as many of the details as possible. Now, sometimes in mediation, you may not be able to resolve all of the matters, but you may be able to resolve some of the matters. And then the remaining issues would be presented to the court for them to make a final determination. And so after mediation, at that point in time, the file would be sent back to the court. They would put it on a calendar for a final hearing. Most counties require that you attempt mediation. That means that a good faith attempt is made to resolve as many of the issues, if not all of the issues, before having to be put down for a final hearing. Because a lot of times, that's more legal fees, that's more time. And obviously the control now is out of your hands. When you're in mediation, you and the other party can decide your fate and how you want to resolve this. But once you put it in front of the judge will make that final decision. And you may not like what that outcome is. So that's usually what the process looks like.
Right. And that seems like a really good process. If you can work things out together, at least you know what you've decided on and you can live with that. Sometimes it's very hard to live with a judge's decision if it goes against you, but that's life. Now, as far as the temporary placement, if there's somebody in the home, if both parents are still in the home, what does the temporary order do? Is it able to remove one of the parties from the home?
Yes, it is. It will determine who will retain possession of the marital home pending the final outcome. Again, it's temporary. It's not final. It may change. It may change during the process, or you guys may determine it's best to sell the home and put it on the market, and that each person gets any proceeds that they're able to get from the home. But a lot of times, when there are minor children involved, parents really don't want to sell the home. They want to be able to keep the children in the home. And
right.
if that's possible, then that's what you do. But if not, then at that point in time, you would be required to, at some point in time, sell the home. Or if one party is going to keep the home, then they would have to buy the other party out, which means they would have a certain period of time to refinance the home into their name. And, the other party would get, whatever equity is available in the home.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what are some of the myths concerning divorce? Obviously, there's a lot of divorce going on right now. It's an extremely high percentage, which is unfortunate. But what are people's views on, getting a divorce that they might think before going through the actual process and, really facing reality from that point?
Well, I think one of the misconceptions is that they can go at it alone. They can represent themselves. And I think that folks do a great disservice to themselves when they decide that they can handle a divorce by themselves. And I'm going to tell you why, because I represented a client in a hearing yesterday. And because he did not retain an attorney for the divorce, there was an order put against him for child support and alimony, where he was really never able to pay that. It should have never been put in place. But because of his failure to retain counsel, there is now a permanent order in place, a permanent divorce decree in place that requires him to pay alimony for the rest of his ex-wife's life, or until she remarries, which is doubtful that will happen, and has put a child support order in place that he has for the last 2 years struggled to pay. And so what you have to do is that now he's retained an attorney to represent him in what's called a modification of that order. Well, the burden is very high in terms of modifying that original order. You have to show that there has been substantial changes in circumstances. And if you're unable to do that, then you will not be successful. So even though you can't pay it, unless you can show that there's been a substantial change, forget it. It's not going to happen. You're stuck with that final order that was given during the divorce. So it's very important that you have representation, or you could end up in the same situation. And what happens is that now you have to hire an attorney to undo the mess that was created in that first matter. And that's always more costly. What I always tell people is either that you're going to pay an attorney on the front end or you're going to pay them more on the back end. It's up to you how you want to do it. So that's one of the misconceptions. Representing yourself is really not a good idea, because the courts are going to hold you to the same standard that they would hold a practicing attorney. And the knowledge that a family law attorney has versus someone who doesn't practice or is not a lawyer is going to be very different. You also will see folks who have hired an attorney who does not specialize in the area of family law. That could put you in a bad situation as well. The other thing is, it's costly to get a divorce these days. It is. It's just as much as it costs you to get married. So it's really imperative that you think about making that decision to get a divorce. Making sure that you have done everything that you can do to make it work, to resolve it, to attend counseling, to do whatever it is that you can to save it, because it's just so costly, but it's so devastating for the children. It devastates children, and people don't understand what that impact looks like on children, but it is a lasting, devastating effect it has on kids. So those would be the misconceptions that I would say that I see.
And as far as common mistakes go, now obviously the biggest mistake people make is not hiring an attorney and thinking that Google can be their attorney, but that never works out too well. But
No.
what other common mistakes do you see people make, even if they do have an attorney?
Not really explaining to their attorney what is the ultimate outcome that they want. Having a clear vision of how do you want this thing to look like? How do you want this thing to end? But because what happens is that folks are gung-ho about a divorce and wanting to get a divorce, because divorce and domestic matters are very emotional and they're very personal. And so you'll see a lot of times that people will go through the process, and after spending, an exorbitant amount of money, they may say, well, I'm not sure if I want to move forward with the divorce. Well, you're there, and you can do that. You can obviously do that, but you have to understand what you've done up until that point and the work that's been done that can't be undone. And so a lot of times, folks say, well, I don't want to move forward anymore, so I would like my money back. Well, work has been done, a service has been provided. And so I see that is a mistake that I see that's very common amongst folks that I have represented or my colleagues have represented is this misconception. But there will be disagreements at times, because you have an ultimate outcome, but your attorney is going to advise you on, does your outcome match the law? And you understand what I'm saying? But something else that we see is that you were married to this person at one point in time. You loved this person at one point in time. And so sometimes people are so enraged that they're not able to see past that anger. But at the end of the day, you have to say, was he a good father? Did he take good care of the children? Because now it's a situation where, no, you don't think that he's entitled to have the children or be involved in the children's life the same way you were. And that's not fair. He may have cheated. He may have done you wrong, but you have to put that aside and be the adult for your children and say, I'm not going to lambaste this individual and make him look bad in front of the courts to the point where he's not able to be involved in his children's life.
Mhm.
That is a common mistake, and it can hurt your case ultimately, where if you keep doing things to hurt and attack the father, the courts will see that, and it may put you in a situation where you end up losing custody of your children, and the custody is handed over to the father. You understand? So that's the thing that I see that people do, that they're unable to look past certain things and
Right.
get to the bottom of it. So I would say that's another issue that I see.
Mm. Yeah, and it's so hard once you have emotions running high. You make these decisions, but ultimately, when you go through the process and you're looking at what you may lose or what you may gain, and decisions can be reversed. But ultimately, when you hire an attorney to do work for you, they need to get paid. That's just the way life works. So tell me, Judith, pinpoint a case that you may have gone through recently or years ago that sticks in your mind. What kind of situation was the person who retained you dealing with? How were you able to help them, and ultimately what was the outcome for them?
I'm actually going to share with you an international custody case that I did. That's another aspect of family law where the parties are either residing in another country, they met in another country, and these individuals, so I can tell you that they met in Jamaica. The father was from Great Britain, but the mother was from Jamaica, and they had a relationship, and the child was born. And obviously, the child was born here in the United States, interestingly enough. So the child had dual citizenship in the U.S. and in Great Britain. And so the mother was here attending school. I believe she was getting her PhD in the U.S. The father flew in from Great Britain, and at that point in time, to see the child, and said he was going to take the child to Great Britain for the summer. And it was an agreement that they had made. And she completed school here in the U.S. and she went back to Jamaica. Well, the international custody cases are decided by the Hague Convention. Is that country a signatory of the Hague Convention? That's the only way that action can be taken. And what happened is that she was living in Jamaica at that point in time. And Jamaica is not a signatory of the Hague Convention. And so there was nothing that was able to be done. Well, the mother moved back to the U.S. She was able to find work and move back to the U.S. And at that time, she reached out for assistance to get her son back, because what had happened is not only did dad take the son for the summer, but he kept the son, enrolled him in school, and would not let her see her child. And obviously there was a financial difference as well. Dad made a lot more money than mom. And so he had, the wherewithal to keep her away from her child. And so anywho, she filed for and indicated that there had been a parental abduction by the father. And so this is filed in federal court. And the father was able to get an attorney to represent him. And so we ended up going to court in federal court. And so the thing that the courts are looking at is, where did they decide that they wanted the child to be raised? In what culture did they want the child to be raised? Who was the primary custodial caregiver of the child? There were a lot of different factors that the courts look at in making a final determination on who will get the child. And ultimately, it was determined that the father had indeed abducted the child, and the child was returned back to the mother. And so very emotional case, but a very rewarding case. And so people tend to forget, you're in the military and you have a child overseas and things fall apart. And all of a sudden, usually what happens is that the parent decides, well, it's not working out, so I'm packing up and I'm moving back to the United States. Well, you have an issue because you have a whole nother parent involved. You have different cultures involved. And so I can tell you another international custody case that I did. The father was from France and he had primary custody of the children. And the mother flew here to the U.S. to be with family to get away from him. Well, guess what? He retained our firm to represent him, and the laws were on his side. And so the minor children had to be released and sent back to France, where they had been raised, where they were in school, where dad had primary custody. So all of that. So you see where it can work both ways. It can go both ways. Yeah,
definitely.
But very interesting case. Very interesting
cases. And especially when you're dealing with people from overseas. Now, I'm from overseas, from the UK myself, and married to an American here in Atlanta. But thankfully, we don't have to deal with any of that. And I understand that you also deal with immigration cases. Is that correct?
We do. We do a lot of family-based petitions, but also a lot of deportation representation, deportation removal, because obviously things are rapidly changing for immigration with the new administration in office. And so we're seeing some changes. We're seeing a lot of changes happening day to day in immigration, but we do represent individuals in deportation proceedings, folks who have been here all of their lives, who either had a green card or had DACA or whatever relief they had sought from immigration. We see those things being revoked. And so we're assisting as many families as we can dealing with those kind of issues.
So whether it's divorce or immigration, obviously people need somebody that deals with that on a daily basis to represent them. So Judith, tell us a little bit more about how people can get in contact with yourself and the law offices of Judith Delus.
All right. We are located in the beautiful downtown Decatur. It is a suburb of Atlanta. We're located not too far away from the DeKalb Superior Courthouse. The address is 315 West Ponce de Leon Avenue, Suite 1057, Decatur, Georgia, 30030. Our phone number here is 678-601-5580. You can find us on the World Wide Web at www.judithdelus, that's D as in Delta, ELUSPA.com. We're on Facebook. We are on Instagram. We are on Twitter. So the handle for Instagram is Atlanta Fathers Rights Attorney. You can find us on Facebook. You can do facebook.com/DeKalb Lawyer. And we're also on Twitter, Law Office _JD. So you can find us about anywhere, Neil.
Excellent. Everywhere now.
That's right.
Well, Judith, I've enjoyed talking with you today, and thank you for sharing all your expertise with our audience. Thank you very much for being my guest on Expert Profiles Atlanta.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And to our listening audience, if you like what you hear, hit that like button and share, and we'll see you next time on the show.
Thank you for listening to Expert Profiles Atlanta with Neil Howe. To learn more about the resources in the show or to listen to past episodes, visit expertprofilesatlanta.com.